What's up, you guys? Sean Ross Sapp, managing editor, FightfulWrestling.com. Here with Justin Credible. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing awesome. I got to say, you influenced me heavily. I watched your Pro Wrestling 101 series, was a big fan of that. What motivated you when you started those to get into those?
Quite honestly, there wasn't much wrestling for me to get over anymore. So I figured, let me use social media, a tool like YouTube, and take my knowledge and give it out to the fans so I could still be known by younger fans coming up in the business. And quite frankly, just to, pass down the knowledge I learned. And the stuff I say in those 101 videos are really things that came from Pat Patterson, Shawn Michaels, Razor Ramon, the guys that I was around at the time. And that's all I did. And it was just a way to try to stay relevant when I wasn't being featured on television, So that was it, basically it.
There were a lot of great lessons in those. I noticed the production values were excellent on there. How did you go about that?
We literally shot those all in one day.
Okay.
Or most of them. A gentleman that worked for the WWE Network had got let go, and he lived close to me. So we literally got in the garage. He had all the equipment, put up a different backdrop, changed T-shirts, and literally I had a notebook with topics, and I just shot off the top of my head. And unfortunately, the reason we stopped doing them was he got rehired.
Oh, okay.
So we couldn't keep doing them, and I hadn't found anybody of that quality to do them again, and I didn't want to just do a cheap version of it. So, but I'd still like someday to revisit that at some point.
We've always heard from people in the know that your transition to ECW is because WWF was like, okay, well, we don't want him going to WCW.
Right.
So is that how you remember it happening as well?
Well, what I remember happening, and actually it's funny, I just had the conversation yesterday with Mikey Whipwreck. It was 1997, and I had been Aldo Montoya for a couple of years. And I'd had quite a few years on the road, working full-time, and I was starting to, I was 23 years old, but working a full-time schedule for 3 years, coming into my own as a performer. So I was like, Vince, this character was great to start with, but it's a joke. I feel like I could contribute. And Kevin and Scott, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall just got, they started with the NWO and that was blowing up. And I had an opportunity to go down there. So I literally scheduled a meeting in Stamford with Vince. And I was like, Vince, can I please have my release? He said no, but what I can do is send you to USWA, to train to be a heel, work down there with Jerry Lawler, and then we'll bring you back up, repackage you. What happened in that short 6-7 weeks was that was when ECW was down there working the angle with Jerry Lawler and USWA, and I reconnected with Chris Candido, who was there as Skip and Zip from the Body Donnas, and he offered me a job, and Vince basically signed my contract over to Paul Heyman, and the rest is history,
So you came in and out of the WWE like 2 or 3 different times.
Yeah.
Each time, who was the person that reaches out to you to say, hey, there's interest here?
I just always reached out to the old man.
Okay.
It was very, you got to understand, it's not the way it is today. From what I hear, nowadays, it's, you want to talk to Vince, it takes a couple of weeks. Back then, Vince was very much on hand. You could go up to him and talk to him personally. Well, when he offered me my job, he literally, we were at the War Memorial Auditorium in Lowell, Massachusetts. He said, PJ, and I was a jobber. He said, PJ, can I talk to you? And he took me outside in a balcony. And he gave me the speech of WWF at the time is the land of opportunity, and we're going to offer you an opportunity. So I had that relationship. So if I had, anytime I wanted to, it was either Vince or Jim Ross, because JR was still there, head of talent relations at the time. So it was either those two guys, but now I know it's very different. Very different,
What goes through your mind when Vince McMahon comes to you and says, PJ, we got to talk?
Honestly, it was so mafioso style. I thought he was going to either kill me or something, dude. It's intimidating. I'm a kid. And here's the most powerful man that I've watched for years and years growing up, one-on-one in a very remote, dark place in a side corner of an arena. So it's very intimidating, very scary, but ultimately, Vince is very fair, man. He is who he is, but he expects from you. What he expects from you is nothing more than he would expect from himself. He's a nut. He works crazy hard, and he expects you to do the same. And I respect that, And I hold no resentments towards WWE, although creatively, they could have done a lot better. But nonetheless, it was always a positive experience, and I've always had a good relationship, and I've been very fortunate and blessed. And to this day, I still have a relationship with the WWE in some capacities, but it's cool. They're a great organization.
I don't know how much you keep up with modern day wrestling, but do you think the NXT that we see today is more of what we should have seen out of the WWE ECW, where the production's different, the in-ring's different, everything's different?
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought that was always what ECW, especially in the later years, was supposed to be. Extreme didn't necessarily mean blood and guts. At first, it may have, but extreme meant extreme, like working, like work rate, high flying, like we saw, at the end of ECW, Tajiri and Super Crazy. So if they took that approach and made the ECW brand like a feeder NXT system to pass said torch to the guys coming up in the main roster, I thought that would have been the right move. But unfortunately, that wasn't the vision at the time,
As we wrap up, one of my favorite finishers of the ECW era, that's incredible. The spinning tombstone, a different spin on the tombstone. How'd you go about developing that? Because obviously it was an established move with The Undertaker, but you're adding a little bit to it.
It was a complete accident.
Really?
This is my first match at the ECW arena. I was wrestling Jerry Lynn, who's one of the greatest of all time. And I literally, it was his idea to do a spot where you do the tombstone, but do a bunch of reversals.
Yeah.
And then he was so light, I just happened to have got him up, and I said, well, just throw some spin on it.
Yeah.
And it was totally happenstance by accident. And then I was like, that looked really cool. That should be your deal. And then it was totally, I didn't plan it because I'm not that smart. But it ended up being, it ended up being just incredible.
And I remember back in that day, like when Jerry Lynn would be in a match, or Tommy Dreamer would come in. Sometimes you'd throw in the cradle. Sometimes they'd throw in the cradle. There was a lot of that going on.
Yeah, it was just, man, it was a wonderful time. We were experimenting.
Yeah.
We were really trying to raise the bar. We were trying to do what WWE and WCW wasn't doing, and it's quite frankly in a lot of the spirit of what AEW is today. So it was just it was a fun time. It was a great time as a performer.
Let the people know where they can follow you on social media before we go.
Yeah, absolutely. Follow me on Twitter at PJ Polacco, also on Instagram. Same with Facebook. ProWrestlingTees.com/JustIncredible. I got 24 shirts. And my podcast with Vince Russo, Talking Elite, drops Friday on Patreon. And that's it. Pretty much it.
Guys, thank you so much. Until next time, we're out.